Did you read that definition? Did you really understand it? It tries to sound as though it's simply a synonym of boycotting, and I guess in some ways it is. In a boycott, that's where a group of people find fault in something that they believe giving money to is only supporting the thing they find wrong. It's easy enough. We see this from time to time due to bad PR events with companies like Goya that completely backfired. For merely talking to a president, Trump in this case, he got boycotted and tried to be canceled. And then there was the BP oil spill that led to a boycott after the disastrous spill in the Gulf of Mexico from one of their rigs in 2010. Ultimately, the boycott was overcome by good PR, commercials, and such, and the company is doing very well today. History, if it isn't canceled entirely when you're watching this, has great examples of true, virtuous, and meaningful boycotts, like the Montgomery Bus Boycott of 1955. It famously lasted a year on the blood, sweat, and tears of Martin Luther King and several other individuals that made a civil rights icon out of themselves and Rosa Parks. But the boycott wasn't about Rosa and where she sat. I said, what? That's right. The boycott had nothing to do with her. The boycott happened when the black community realized it had power in numbers. 75% of the riders were black, and they had leverage for change just by not getting on. It was simple, like a strike done by customers, peaceful in the face of racism. Its plan was to hurt the bus line, of course, but financially. Only until it agreed to desegregate in 1956. And then they returned for their commuting as good-paying customers again. The plan wasn't to kill the bus line or hurt the white individuals who still needed to use it. They just wanted to have equal rights and respect from the bus line as a paying passenger. That is a boycott. That is success. A decade later, we got another landmark example with the Delano grape boycott. Don't recognize this one from your history class? I don't expect you to. It was another great equality Boy Scout that lasted 5 years from 1965 to 70 and was countrywide. This was led by Cesar Chavez, a name you probably do know, and his National Farm Workers Association, and it began with the strike of Filipinos working for Delano because they weren't receiving minimum wage, which at that time was only $1 an hour. The public outcry to this happening was so strong that an estimated 14 million Americans of all races, coast to coast, stopped opening their wallets to Delano. That was until the historic contracts were finally signed in 1970 for fair pay and even benefits for all employees of Delano. At no point was the boycott about ending the company or harassing those who still bought the grapes. It was America asking for Delano to correct an unethical practice and was successful and done for the benefit of a small American minority. How racist of America. Can't imagine something like that happening so long ago. In 2005, we had a girl caught, and yes, renaming was a thing back then too. This was where a group of women sought to have a line of t-shirts made by Abercrombie and Fitch removed for what they deemed to be degrading or body-shaming slogans towards women. It did end the line of shirts and was a success, but again, the woman involved did not try to end the company or target the women who wore the offensive shirts. Do you see a pattern building here? Even the beginning thoughts of an American independence began with a boycott of English imports. For the adults watching, maybe you'll remember something called the Stamp Act. It happened in 1765. This is where England passed a law to begin taxing all printed and paper goods it sent to the colonies to pay for financial losses during the French-Indian War, and ended 1 year later in 1766 due to the outright boycotting of anything English, giving rise to the famous protest slogan, "No taxation without representation." No, Boston Tea Party was not during this time, but thanks for playing along. This was a boycott 11 years before we declared independence, 8 years before the Tea Party, if you're wondering. And we were asking once again for equality, this time from the government, not to destroy it, to kill the king, to destroy the parliament, or even gain our independence. So now, when you see how history has used boycotts, you can see a vast difference between it and the use of cancel culture. Cancel culture itself is a fairly new term, first heard on Twitter in 2017 and is better defined by tweaking the two words, canceling culture. It tries to remove culture and history that isn't as virtuous as the woke standards of today, for not being aware that these Karens and snowflakes would one day exist. Complaints in our culture is nothing new and has led to a great change in America, including abolishing slavery, women's suffrage, civil rights, gay rights, and still a lot of work still needs to be done. But like many well-founded and good-intending movements like Black Lives Matter and the Me.2 movement, our culture, like them, have been politically hijacked by radical activism. Antifa, for all of its destruction, was a group in the 1930s during Germany who opposed the Nazis and fascism. A great idea, great group. But the new Antifa, BLM, and cancel culture itself uses fascism as its daily weapon. Cancel culture has been weaponized by the far-left progressives for political reasons and agendas. They are superimposing the cancel phrase over words that they really mean, like fascism, anti-free speech, and conformity, just to make it an easier pill to swallow that is wrapped in a warm, fuzzy blanket called social justice, where the words radical and extreme are badges of honor sparkling in the glow of a burning American flag, as they target people, companies, movies, songs, cartoons, books, those of today and throughout history, for the sin of not being woke in their own time. Book burnings of Germany and the fascist Nazis have now been replaced with book and media removal notices from Amazon and Amazon Prime. Imagine getting a speeding ticket today for a drive you took 20 years ago because the speed limit was dropped today due to road construction. That is the absolute insanity of cancel culture. I'm sure I've missed many things and people that have been canceled so far, and I didn't include the dozens of YouTubers and TikTokers and other influencers that I found online. But here's a list that I'm going to play of what I was able to find, and I put them into categories for easier reference of everything being canceled or has been canceled, starting with our children. Feel free to pause as this goes along. I'll continue talking, but to read the list, because I had to speed it up so that the scroll didn't last 7 minutes. Some of these are absolutely warranted due to crimes like R. Kelly or changing the Washington Redskin name. Because let's be honest, does Beverly Hills Whites or Detroit Black sound good to anyone? Huh? Alright, then no complaints down in the comments. Come to think of it, what the hell is a brown in Cleveland? But then you have liberals and blackface keeping their jobs like Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, and Senator Ralph Northam of Virginia, while Roseanne Barr lost her pro-Trump reunion show for comparing someone to Planet of the Apes. Liberals called it racist because the person was black, and it was racist by referring to her as an ape. No one cries when Ron Perlman looks like a white gorilla, or Sarah Jessica Parker looks like a horse. I'll show you the side-by-sides at the end of the scroll. It'll shock you. Sometimes the shoe just fits and it has nothing to do with race. So buckle up, America. This monster list is fresh, hungry, and looking for more every day. Canceling is not merely to stop giving your support to something like a boycott, such as not seeing an actor's movie or not buying tickets to a concert. Canceling moves further to put extreme pressures on employers from hiring or to fire and blacklist the canceled person. Or, a big or here, they will suffer the same organized wrath and a ripple effect for guilt by association. This isn't for just high-profile people and celebrities anymore. Any and all citizens are targeted, from police officers and lawyers, TikTokers and YouTubers, construction workers and scientists, bakers, churches, publishers, filmmakers. Anyone of any stripe who doesn't follow the pre-described liberal orthodoxy runs the risk of being canceled and then being doxxed. Another tool of canceling. If you don't know, doxing is when they give out your home address, your work location, phone number, social media accounts. Also, you can be attacked by people behind a keyboard acting as bored cowards, or in person by those with nothing better to do or job to go to. You can be canceled for just speaking. I might be canceled for this, or not speaking when the time comes. Switzerland neutrality does not exist anymore. It is a with us or against us mob mentality in cancel culture. If you are a non-victimized identity on their chart, or if you don't claim your victimhood if they say you are a victim, like a black conservative, then you are part of the problem as well. The woke mob only believes two classifications of people exist, with an infinite amount of genders between the two. But two classes of people. You are either a righteous victim or you are a multiphobic oppressor. Period. If you don't think you're a victim, then shut up! You are to be seen and not heard, like a well-indoctrinated child. Even when being spoken to, shut up. They are right and you must sit there and be educated. Your willingness to debate or present facts, logic, or simply utilize your right to free speech is disrespectful, a sign of your guilt, and it will have your new phobia label slapped on your chest like the scarlet letter. Come to think of it, the scarlet letter is probably going to be canceled for misogyny and anti-feminism. You may want to go out and go buy that now since Dr. Seuss is going for $1,000 on eBay. The last thing I listed in the scroll was white fragility, because it proves my point and is now required reading for the woke. The author is Robin DiAngelo, and she wrote in 2018 a book called White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Speak About Racism, a white woman herself. She defines this in such a way into trapping you into her definition so she's always right. It is a state in which even a minimal amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves from old fragile whitey, such as the outward display of emotions of anger when being confronted as a racist, fear and guilt, and behaviors such as arguing or being silent or leaving the stress-induced situation. So, you can't have any range of defense for yourself or emotions while explaining you're not a racist when accused of racism. You can't argue when provoked. You can't walk away to stop the person from accusing you, nor can you sit there and take it in silence. The only thing it doesn't condemn is admitting that you're a racist, or just flat out dying to get to the next part of your day. It's such a dumb idea, a Karen had to write it. But in her circle of wokeness, she is backed up by a new term, implicit bias. Whites are racist, period, whether we know it or not, and therefore must accept it, make amends for it, and don't just not be a racist. Now you have to be an anti-racist and the woke activist. To my fellow conservatives watching, laughing, scared of what America is doing to itself, this is not an argument that the Republicans are righteous or the conservatives are, or either political party. I consider myself, for most part, to be a conservative with some liberal tendencies, maybe a libertarian. I'm not a Bible thumper, and I believe in gay rights. I believe in state rights and small government, the Constitution, gun rights, First Amendment, but I don't believe in canceling all entitlements. Some, not all, some limitations. And I do think Nevada has it right with regulated sex work. Cancel culture is a fringe fascist movement that happens to side with the left progressive ideas at this time because it helps drive negative information in the Democrats' favor. They take the free help, but it was not started by the Democratic Party. It could be done as a far-right movement to do the exact same job. Don't think so? Jerry Falwell, throughout the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, with a group called the Moral Majority and the Religious Right, fought to discredit all moral opposition, ban books when it comes against ideas of faith, wanting to ensure what media and educational materials were taught to kids in school, wanted to censor, ban, or give R ratings to any movies with wizards, demonic images, or witches, including old Disney movies like Cinderella all the way up to Harry Potter. In shows with non-traditional values like Will and Grace, had concerts canceled for many rock bands like Marilyn Manson and Slayer, and they wanted to ban porn and the internet. You might know the movie People vs. Larry Flint. That was Jerry Falwell's Going After Hustler magazine. He's the one portrayed in it. That was conservative censorship and canceling at a cultural level. That's all cancel culture is. Recycled moral superiority, even at a time today when America is hyper-aware of the results of bullied or cyber-bullied kids and school shootings, zero-tolerance policies, and teen suicides from bullies. However, You can say what you want about anyone as long as you are with the right side. Your message is proper to the politics under social justice, and you claim to be a warrior. Social justice is another term that has great purpose and value in America, but again was hijacked and again superimposed over any idea, legal or not, to further press conformity to the target. It's a gold star sticker, a rubber stamp of approval to not only cancel culture, but protests, to give permission for protest, rioting, looting, and even killing. Decent and reasonable Democrats, centrists or center-left as they're called, can't even argue the moral or ethical reasons why some of these acts are wrong, because they would get canceled themselves, all being done under the flag of social justice. The AOCs, Maxine Waters, and Kamala Harris's of the left are now Dr. Frankenstein cowering in the alleyways watching the monster destroy the streets in so many American cities. They advocated for the unrest and even raised bailout money for those arrested. These are political leaders of all Americans with a national stage. One is now our vice president. Look this one up for yourself if you don't think this is a little scary. Per a group called the Trump Accountability Project, you can go to their website, it states that those who voted for Trump, those who staffed his government, and those who funded his campaign should be held accountable and never to be forgotten or allowed to work again for furthering his agenda. Presumably, that's 74 million Americans, about a quarter of the population. Leave Trump out of that for a second and think about what they're saying. This project is setting out to identify and punish American citizens because of the freedom of speech, freedom to vote, and financially aid a political campaign of their choosing. This is happening today in 2021, and Kamala Harris agrees. But looking back, our educational institutions that once were the megaphones for free thought, rigorous political debate, and praised the First Amendment like no other institution in America, now have become generators of political drones, indoctrinators and enders of alternate ideas and debate. Conservatives are forced to jump through numerous hoops to speak on most campuses, if at all. Can't imagine that their tuition-paying and carefully groomed little student body would be granted free thinking. What is interesting is that today, conservatives, Republicans, are the new counterculture. We are the hippies of the 2020s. Break out the black lights, felt posters, plug in the lava lamps, and throw on some Hendrix. My bell-bottoms be damned. Democrats have become everything they accuse Republicans of across the last 70 years. Conservatives are now the warriors of free speech on college campuses. We are wanting to end foreign wars and world policing like in the 60s, like what the liberals said they wanted. What party was in charge back then? Oddly enough, the Democrats owned the government for the entirety of the 1960s, where all the protests began with the Vietnam War, the great protest music, pop art was created, civil rights came to a head after numerous assassinations of civil rights leaders who used their voice in an attempt to gain equality for everyone. Congress, whose voice is their vote, they spoke by passing the Civil Rights Acts. 80% of Republicans, granted not 100, who were the minority party at the time, voted to pass civil rights. 80%. While 60% of Democrats did. Democrats who held both chambers of Congress and the presidency had less of a percentage of approval for granting equality when it was demanded by the people. Democrats who ran the Confederacy in the Civil War and fought to keep slavery 100 years earlier. Democrats who created the KKK when they lost the Civil War and created the Jim Crow laws. Democrats who passed the horrible prison reforms in the 1990s thanks to Bill Clinton and Joe Biden. Biden, who didn't want his kids going to a school in a racial jungle 20 some odd years earlier because he didn't want segregation. That reform destroyed black families for a generation plus until Trump gave us the First Step Act to start correcting it and freed a lot of black super predators, I believe Biden called them. But Trump is a racist, right? Democrats. They are the party today benefiting from this cancel culture as it attempts to erase not just American history, which means something more to them, but their own history. This is why I said Democrats didn't create this, but found a way to use it, to weaponize it. They are allowing the mob to push for history to be rewritten like a shitty Hollywood reboot. 1619 Project is the title. In hopes of burying their history and they can stop talking about the big switch, we're magically woke from their racist history, and Republicans magically accepted it as our eternal label that now we're the racists. Democrats are the cause and reason for all they pretend to fight like hell against. Facts matter when you speak, or they do if your goal is the truth. But the unwritten and poorly held secret of the First Amendment is that it does not require the truth to be said. The reason is so that opinions are protected. And that's the point. All thoughts and opinions, even uncomfortable and offensive ones, and your personal truth is protected. Period. Full stop. Over. It simply is the right of free speech to say what you want. Ethical standards are not even required when speaking or reporting the news. Much like the Second Amendment, which we'll talk about in the next video. It's an absolute right. Freedom to say what you want and with as many unfiltered lies is fine. As long as you're not speaking to a cop, you're in court, or you're talking to a government official. It simply is your right as an American. That makes fake news constitutionally protected. We can complain about it, but it's protected. Fake news, spin, opinion, it's always been here. It's in the fabric of America. But now everyone has a voice and a platform to give it range past your shouting out the window and can touch the world instantly with social media. That is what cancel culture is really about, to limit your range and protect the spin, protect the message, protect the indoctrination. Cancel culture has entered our personal space. And when someone does that, you have a right to defend yourself, to stand your ground. And if violence targets you, then your next right comes into play. The right to bear arms in the Second Amendment. Now we'll be going into depth with that right and the attempts to cancel it in episode 3 here in about 2 weeks. So hit that notification bell, like, please subscribe, and share the hell out of this because I'm just getting started, my fellow Americans. This has been once again your host, Thunderduck. Thanks for watching another episode of Uncanceled History. Leave a comment for a topic if you think that there's something being canceled that I could tell a story about. But until then, keep safe out there, America. Take care, and don't be canceled.